Chapter 194. This old man isn't as easy to deal with as those Saint Masters. Seeing the incoming light wind sword, the old man's face showed a trace of disdain. His hand that was about to grab Xianxia's neck suddenly changed direction and shot towards the light wind sword with his saint force. Pa! The old man's palm viciously slapped the light wind sword, and the light wind sword was sent flying more than 10 meters to the side. At the same time, the old man's face slightly changed as he looked at his own hand in shock. The hand that had struck the light wind sword was now covered with faint traces of blood. Looking at the wounds on his hand, the old man was slightly dazed. His face was filled with disbelief as he took a deep breath and looked at Xianxia with a complicated expression. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, the light wind sword that had just been struck by the old man turned into a bolt of lightning and shot towards the old man. The old man's face slightly changed as his body slightly swayed. In an instant he moved 3 meters away and the light wind sword finally pierced through his afterimage. However, the light wind sword's speed was extremely fast. Just as the old man dodged, the light wind sword immediately circled around in the air and once again pierced towards the old man. The old man's eyes turned cold as a surge of saint force appeared in his hand and condensed into a light blue iron hammer. The iron hammer wasn't very big, only about the size of an adult's head. It was covered with a faint blue light and had a strange pattern on its handle. The old man swung the iron hammer towards the light wind sword. Ding! Following the sound of metal colliding, the iron hammer seemed to carry 1,000 kilograms of force as it smashed into the light wind sword, sending it flying far away. At the same time, Xianxia let out an almost inaudible grunt. His face, which was already rather pale, became as pale as a sheet of paper, devoid of any blood. Wuyun, I'll ask you one last time. Are you going to hand over the battle technique or not? Next time, I won't be merciful. The old man stared at Xianxia with a gloomy expression as he said in a deep voice. In reality, the old man himself was not certain whether the battle skill was with Xianxia or not, so he really did not dare to kill Xianxia right now. He knew that as long as Xianxia was still alive, even if Xianxia did not hand over the battle skill, he could still capture him and take him back. There would be plenty of ways to get the information they wanted from Xianxia. However, if he killed Xianxia, it was very likely that he would not be able to obtain anything. Xianxia stared coldly at the old man and gnashed his teeth. Harito clan, I'll remember it. Do you dare to tell me your name? Hearing this, the old man's face showed a trace of disdain. What? You still want revenge? With your strength that isn't even a great Saint Master, you want to take revenge on my Harito clan? You must be dreaming. Since you want to know my name, then there's no harm in telling you. Remember, this old man's name is Yen Kazaler. Yen Kazaler, I'll remember it. Xianxia hatefully said. Just as he finished speaking, the light wind sword flew towards the old man from afar. Seeing that Xianxia didn't have any intention of handing over the battle technique, the old man's eyes flashed with a trace of anger. Finally, he lost the last bit of patience in his heart. The hammer in his hand suddenly exploded with a surge of light blue saint force, bringing with it a sharp whistling sound as it flew towards the light wind sword. Just as the light wind sword and the hammer were about to collide, the light wind sword's trajectory suddenly changed. Like an incomparably nimble poisonous snake, it dodged the hammer and stabbed towards the old man's throat. At the same time, Xianxia's feet fiercely stomped on the ground and his entire body shot out like a cannonball, quickly escaping into the distance. Insignificant skill. The old man coldly snorted and immediately changed the direction of his attack, smashing towards the light wind sword. His entire body moved horizontally 0.5 meter away, just enough to avoid the light wind sword's attack. In the blink of an eye, Xianxia had already escaped 50 meters away. Under his control, the light wind sword turned into a silver light and flew back into his hand. Seeing Xianxia escape 50 meters away, the old man's eyes finally revealed a trace of killing intent. A trifling Saint Master was as weak as an ant in front of an Earth Saint Master. He didn't even put Xianxia in his eyes. But now, this ant in front of him had actually escaped from his hands. To him, this was an absolute humiliation. I'll catch you and make you suffer a fate worse than death. The old man's face darkened as he chased after Yang Kai. The speed of an Earth Saint Master was undoubtedly much faster than Genshin. In just 2 breaths of time, the distance between them had been reduced to 20 meters. At this time, the light wind sword in Genshin's hand once again turned into a bolt of lightning as it pierced towards the old man. Facing Genshin's attack, the old man didn't dare to underestimate it even though he was an Earth Saint Master. His body slightly swayed as he dodged the attack. As he dodged, the speed at which he was advancing slowed down a bit. The light wind sword immediately turned in midair and stabbed towards the old man from behind. The old man's eyes revealed a trace of anger. The hammer in his hand contained a large amount of Saint force as it smashed towards the light wind sword. The light wind sword nimbly turned and once again dodged the old man's attack. Boom! Because the old man had used too much strength in his attack, he was unable to retract his hammer. In the end, the hammer fiercely smashed into the ground, causing the Saint force contained in the hammer to explode and create a 2-meter deep crater. Genshin retrieved the light wind sword and continued to run as fast as he could. Afterwards, this scene repeated itself over and over again. Genshin continued to run as fast as he could while controlling the light wind sword to harass the old man from afar. This made it so that the old man was unable to catch up to him. This chase continued for a full 2 hours. When Genshin reached the top of a mountain, he had no choice but to stop because he had reached a cliff. After running for 2 hours and using the light wind sword to harass the old man, Genshin was almost completely exhausted. If it weren't for his strong willpower, he would have already collapsed. After all, using the light wind sword to control the sword was just too exhausting. Right now, Genshin's clothes were completely dyed red from the blood flowing out of his wounds. Because he had used up too much of his energy, Genshin's head was dizzy. He was like an ordinary person who hadn't slept for a few days and wanted nothing more than to fall asleep. Crap, this is actually a cliff. Forcing himself to not fall, Genshin looked at the bottomless cliff in front of him and his heart sank. Finally, a trace of despair appeared in his eyes. He was not afraid of death, but he was extremely unwilling to die like this. At the same time, he still had his mother who loved him the most in this world, as well as his elder brother and sister who had once cared for him, Changyang Hu and Changyang Mingyue. Bastard, die for me! At this time, a furious roar came from behind. The old man with the strength of an Earth Saint Master quickly arrived behind Genshin and viciously smashed his hammer into Genshin's back. Pang! Genshin was already completely exhausted, so he didn't have the strength to dodge the old man's attack. In the end, he was sent flying by the old man's hammer and fell into the cliff. The old man's face changed slightly when he saw Genshin disappear from his sight. He had been blinded by his anger earlier, so he had failed to see the terrain clearly. As a result, only now did he discover that there was actually a bottomless cliff up ahead. Chapter 195. When Genshin slowly opened his heavy eyelids, the blurry scene before him gradually cleared up. The first thing that entered his eyes was a roof made of earthen tiles. A few cracks in the roof were covered with spider webs. A few spiders were crawling around, enjoying the delicious food that was trapped in the spider webs. Genshin's gaze subconsciously wandered around. Following that, the scene around him became clear to Genshin's eyes. He saw that he was in a small room. The lighting in the room was rather dim, but he could still see the furnishings clearly. The furnishings in the room were very simple. Aside from a few wooden cabinets and a few small stools, there was nothing else. The floor was not completely made of marble. It was only made of hard, dry earth. What is this place? Looking at the scene around him, a trace of doubt appeared on Genshin's tired face. Following that, he felt a slight pain in his head. Memories from before surged out from the depths of his mind like a tide, forming images that replayed in Genshin's head. Genshin vaguely remembered that after he was knocked off the cliff by the old man with the strength of an Earth Saint Master, he seemed to have fallen into the water and fainted. He had no idea what happened after that. I'm not dead. Looks like I was saved by someone. Genshin quickly understood the situation before him. He immediately felt a small burst of excitement. In that situation back then, he had thought that he was dead for sure. He never thought that after falling off the cliff, he would still be alive. The Harito clan and the people who surrounded me in Fengyang City. Genshin, will definitely not let you go. When Genshin thought back to everything that had happened before, his eyes burned with hatred. He clenched his fists tightly. He had already committed the names of the dozen or so forces to memory. Just as Genshin's body tensed up, a heart-wrenching pain came from his back. It was so painful that Genshin could not help but let out a low groan. Even his face was slightly pale. After a while, when the pain passed, Genshin took a deep breath. He lay on the bed and twisted his head to look at himself. He discovered that he had changed into a set of linen clothes. He could also clearly feel that the wounds on his body had been bandaged. However, when Genshin's gaze landed on his waist, his expression suddenly changed. His space belt had actually disappeared. "Where's my space belt?" A trace of panic finally appeared in Genshin's eyes. All of his belongings, including the Bai family's heirloom that his mother, Bai Yuntian, and the space ring that his father had given him, as well as the hundreds of thousands of purple crystal coins that he had obtained through various means, were all in his space belt. Now that he had lost his space belt, it was simply asking for his life. Furthermore, there were a large number of Class 4 monster cores and 2 Class 5 monster cores in the space belt. These were all important items that Genshin could not lack for his cultivation. Genshin's gaze wandered around the dimly lit room in a panic, trying to find his space belt. However, in the end, his face was filled with disappointment. He could not find even a shadow of his space belt. Just as Genshin was about to lose his patience over the matter of his space belt, a series of footsteps came from outside the room. Then, with a creak, the wooden door of the room opened. A bare-chested middle-aged man wearing a pair of shorts walked in. This middle-aged man had a simple and honest face, but his appearance was very ordinary. As soon as the middle-aged man entered the house, when he entered the room, he saw that Genshin had already woken up. He could not help but reveal a trace of a smile on his face. "You're finally awake. You've been unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. If it weren't for the fact that you're still breathing, I would have thought that you were already dead." Genshin's gaze fell on the middle-aged man, and he immediately asked, "Where's my space belt?" Seeing Genshin's anxious expression, the middle-aged man smiled. He then walked to a cabinet beside Genshin, opened the cabinet's door, and took out an ordinary-looking space belt. Afterwards, he said to Genshin, "I've always kept your space belt here. Kid, don't worry. We definitely won't touch your things." After saying that, he handed the space belt to Genshin. Genshin accepted the space belt and immediately checked its contents. Only after confirming that the important items were still there did he finally relax. Genshin looked at the middle-aged man again. At this moment, his gaze towards the middle-aged man had become much gentler. He asked, "Did you save me?" The middle-aged man moved a stool over and sat beside Genshin's bed. He chuckled, "2 days ago, when I went fishing in the river, I saw you floating in the water covered in blood. You were still alive, so I saved you." "Thank you for saving me." Genshin looked at the middle-aged man gratefully as he spoke with great sincerity. The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "There's no need to thank me. Young man, you're really lucky. I can see that your injuries are so serious, but you're still alive. Especially your back, even your bones are exposed. I've lived for so long, but this is the first time I've seen someone survive such a serious injury." "All right, kid, you've been unconscious for 2 days and 2 nights. Are you hungry? I'll get you something to eat," the middle-aged man continued. Genshin nodded. "Then I'll have to trouble you, uncle." After not eating for 2 days, Genshin really was rather hungry. Afterwards, the middle-aged man scooped a bowl of rice and some meat for Genshin. After eating, Genshin's hunger was somewhat alleviated. Afterwards, he used rest as an excuse to get the middle-aged man to leave. After the middle-aged man left, Genshin slowly closed his eyes and began to silently recover his exhausted spirit. In order to deal with the old man's pursuit, Genshin had used the divine sword manipulation technique to almost exhaust his spirit. Although he had recovered a little after being unconscious for 2 days, it was still not of much use. Now, he needed to recover his spirit to its peak before he could use the radiant sacred stone to heal. The middle-aged man had come a few times while Xianxia was recovering, but he did not disturb him when he saw that Xianxia was asleep. Very soon night fell. Xianxia lay in bed for over 4 hours, but he did not move at all. It wasn't until the sun rose the next morning that Xianxia, who was lying on the bed with his eyes closed, finally woke up. After over a night of recovery, he had finally recovered 80% of his exhausted spirit. However, perhaps it was because he had overexerted himself 2 days ago, so it would be very difficult for his spirit to recover to its peak in a short amount of time without 2 or 3 days of recovery. Chapter 196. The dense radiant saint force turned into a milky white light that enveloped Xianxia's entire body. As the milky white light turned into a strange energy that continuously entered Xianxia's body, the wounds on his body began to heal at a rate visible to the naked eye. Because it was currently daytime and because of the special nature of radiant saint force, Xianxia wasn't afraid that the fact that he could control radiant saint force would be leaked. Even if someone were to approach him while he was healing, he would be able to immediately sense it and stop controlling the radiant saint force. Now that Xianxia's soul was much stronger than before, not only was the time he could control the radiant saint force much faster, even the density of the radiant saint force was much higher than before. As a result, after 5 hours of healing, his wounds were finally completely healed. However, Xianxia also paid a small price. His soul that had yet to return to its peak was almost completely drained. His head was so heavy that Xianxia couldn't even muster the slightest bit of energy. He wanted nothing more than to fall asleep immediately. Afterwards, Xianxia began to recover his soul. After a day and a night, he finally woke up the next morning. However, Xianxia didn't get out of bed and continued to rest. After all, the middle-aged man who had saved him before had already checked his wounds. It had only been 2 days, so if the middle-aged man learned that he had already recovered, he would definitely expose his identity as a radiant saint master. After all, no matter how good the medicine was, it was impossible for him to recover from such severe wounds in just 2 days. Xianxia still didn't want to reveal his identity as a radiant saint master, so he would do his best to keep his other identity a secret. Unless he had no other choice, he wouldn't easily reveal it. This was because he was very clear that with the special status of a radiant saint master in the Tianyuan continent, once his identity was exposed, then there would be a lot of trouble. Lying on his bed, Xianxia silently recovered his saint qi. In the past 2 days, he had spent most of his energy on healing his injuries. Now, his saint qi was completely empty. The light wind sword in his dantian was also dim. Soon it was noon. At this time, Xianxia could clearly smell the fragrance of food drifting in from outside the house. Creak! At this time, the wooden door suddenly opened. The middle-aged man who saved Xianxia walked in quietly and finally stopped in front of Xianxia's bed. The middle-aged man could not help but sigh as he looked at Xianxia, who was still lying on the bed with his eyes closed. He murmured to himself, "Sigh, you've been unconscious for another 2 days. You haven't eaten in the past 2 days, and you're so heavily injured. If this continues, I really don't know how much longer you can last. It's a pity that we're a poor mountain village and we can't find any effective medicine." The middle-aged man helplessly shook his head as he turned around and walked out the door. "Uncle." Suddenly, a weak voice called out from behind the middle-aged man. Hearing this, the middle-aged man's body slightly stiffened. He immediately turned around and looked at Xianxia, who was lying on the bed. His voice was filled with joy as he said, "Young man, you're finally awake. If you had been unconscious for a few more days, I was afraid that you would never wake up again." Hearing this, Xianxia's face revealed a trace of a smile as he said, "Sorry for making Big Tree worry. It's okay, it's okay. It's good that you can wake up. At least your life is saved. By the way, you haven't eaten for 2 days. I'm sure you're hungry. I'll go get you something to eat." After saying that, the middle-aged man turned and walked out. Very soon, a bowl of steaming hot rice and a few plates of fried meat were brought in by the middle-aged man. He said, "We're only in a remote mountain village. The best thing to eat is the meat of the wild beasts that we usually hunt in the mountains. Now that you're injured, we've specially made some meat for you to nourish your body. Thank you, uncle. Saying this, Jianshan slowly climbed up from the bed. When the middle-aged man saw this, he hurriedly said, "Hey, don't move. You're injured, so it's easy to pull your wounds." As he said this, he put the food in his hands on the side of the cabinet and quickly went to support Jianshan. Jianshan smiled and said, "Although I'm a little injured, after 2 days of recuperation, my injuries have basically stabilized. Just a little movement like this won't get in the way." Seeing Jianshan slowly sit up as if nothing had happened, the middle-aged man could not help but reveal a trace of envy in his eyes. He said, "Kid, your strength should be pretty good. Your back is so heavily injured, yet you can sit up in just a few days." Hearing this, Jianshan deeply glanced at the middle-aged man and smiled faintly. "Uncle, looks like you're not simple either. You must have once roamed the Tianyuan continent." The middle-aged man sighed. Jianshan's words seemed to have stirred up some painful memories. His face was filled with sorrow. After a moment of silence, the middle-aged man slowly said, "Actually, over a decade ago, I was also a mercenary. I possessed the strength of a mid-saint master and traveled the continent with a few brothers who had gone through life and death together. However, ever since we came across a group of bandits while escorting some goods, my fate changed because of that. That group of bandits was very strong. After a bitter battle, although we managed to drive them away in the end, we also paid an extremely heavy price. As for my saint weapon, it was also destroyed in that battle by someone who was much stronger than me. Although I didn't die, I lost all of my abilities and became a cripple. In the end, I came to this small mountain village to live a life of peace." Jianshan fell silent for a moment when he heard that. He could completely understand the middle-aged man's feelings. Being reduced from a mercenary who had once roamed the continent to a cripple who could not use martial arts was definitely a torture worse than death for a man who once possessed great power and great ambitions. Afterwards, Jianshan ate his rice as he chatted with the middle-aged man. After a while, Jianshan learned the middle-aged man's name, Rothko. Rothko was already in his 40s. Ever since his saint weapon was destroyed and he became a cripple, he came to this small village by himself. After over a decade, he married a girl from a nearby village and gave birth to 2 children, 1 son and 1 daughter. They just happened to be 10 years old this year. Afterwards, Jianshan temporarily stayed in Rothko's home. However, he did not tell anyone that he had recovered. He locked himself in his room all day, using recuperation as an excuse so that Rothko would not disturb him when he had nothing to do. After that, he sat on his bed and continued to refine the saint force in his body. Although he had spent a few days refining the saint force in Fengyang City, Jianshan still had not completely dealt with the aftereffects of using monster cores to raise his strength too quickly. Chapter 197. Over 10 days later, Jianshan finally left the bed that he had been lying on for half a month. He stood on the ground with his feet bare. Jianshan lowered his head to look at the large linen clothes on his body. The linen clothes were clearly what Rothko usually wore. They were extremely large on Jianshan's body. Jianshan pulled out a set of clothes that he had prepared in the past from his space belt before taking off Rothko's clothes. However, just as Jianshan took off his clothes, he suddenly became stunned. He stared at his own skin in a daze. His skin was no longer as white and tender as it usually was. At this moment, the surface of his skin was dark red. It was an extremely strange sight. Looking at the color of his skin, Jianshan was stunned. An extremely strange expression appeared in his eyes. He was extremely puzzled by the condition of his body. A moment later, a thought suddenly flashed through Jianshan's head. He abruptly pulled up the information regarding his current condition from the depths of his memories. This is a sign that the poison resistance in the silver-striped golden snake's blood has completely fused with its body. Could it be that in the 10 days I've been lying in bed, my 10,000 poisons resistance has reached perfection? Jianshan cried out in surprise. His voice was filled with excitement and excitement. It had been more than a year since he had absorbed the poison resistance factor from the silver-striped golden snake's blood. His 10,000 poison resistance body had finally reached the perfect stage. Now, his body could be called a true 10,000 poison resistance body. With this body of impenetrable body, as long as I don't come across any poison more potent than the silver-striped golden snake, I have nothing to fear. Xianxia was extremely excited. Among the countless poisons on the Tianyuan continent, the venom of the silver-striped golden snake definitely ranked in the top 10. Among the known poisons in the world, there were no more than 10 poisons that were more potent than the venom of the silver-striped golden snake, and every single one of these poisons was extremely rare. According to the books, when the body of impenetrable body reaches perfection, the entire body, including the face, will turn dark red. This will last for half a month to a month. After that, the color will gradually disappear and the skin will return to normal. Doesn't that mean that my face has completely turned dark red? Xianxia lowered his head and muttered to himself. It was a pity that he did not have a mirror right now. Otherwise, he really would have liked to look in the mirror and see if his face was dark red as well. After changing into the clothes he had taken out from the space, Xianxia folded up Rothko's linen clothes and placed them on a clean cabinet to the side before walking out. With a creak, Xianxia pushed open the slightly old wooden door. When the sunlight from outside shone in, the dim wooden hut finally had some light. Looking at the position of the sun in the sky, it should be almost noon. Outside the wooden hut was a small courtyard. The hard soil on the ground had already cracked like a spider web. Diagonally across from Xianxia, there were a few wooden huts. Further away, there were wooden huts of various sizes scattered around. The colors of the huts were somewhat old. A few young children were running happily in a spacious area. Their bell-like laughter could be heard constantly. Xianxia walked out of the wooden hut. This was the first time he had seen the environment here in the half a month that he had been here. This was a very remote village. Looking at it, one could almost see the entire landscape. Just from the number of huts, it could be seen that there were not many people living in this small mountain village. Rothko, today's harvest is really good. In just one morning, we have hunted 2 wild boars. This is enough for our entire village to eat for a few days. Yes, it seems like we don't have to go hunting tomorrow. We can just comfortably stay at home for 2 days and relax. It would be great if we have such good luck every day. This way, our future days will definitely be much more comfortable. At this time, Xianxia vaguely heard voices in the distance. When Xianxia looked over, he saw Rothko, who had saved him, and a few burly men walking over from afar. 2 of them were carrying huge wild boars on their shoulders. Looking at their heads, one of them weighed at least 100 kilograms. At this time, Rothko also noticed Xianxia standing in front of the door. He greeted from afar, "Hey, young man, have your injuries healed? You can even get out of bed and walk." Xianxia smiled and said, "Thank you for your concern, uncle. I have some good medicine with me. After recuperating for more than 10 days, my injuries have completely recovered." The few middle-aged men standing beside Rothko also noticed Xianxia at the same time. One of them immediately said with a smile, "Rothko, I heard that you saved a person from the river. Is that person you saved this little brother?" Rothko nodded with a smile. Soon, the few of them came to Xianxia's side. Rothko pointed at Xianxia and said, "This little brother is called Xianxia. Although he is young, you must not underestimate him. He has a tough life. I thought that he would not be able to live after such a serious injury, but I didn't expect that he would be standing here alive and well again after just 10 days. Just this point alone is not something we can compare to." "Oh, is that so? It seems that little brother Xianxia is also quite powerful." Hearing this, the other middle-aged men all smiled and said, they all looked very kind. Rothko then said to Xianxia, "Little brother, let me introduce you. These are the men of this village. This is Fang Yungang, this is Cheng Liran, and the last one is Qiu Chujia." Xianxia clasped his hands at them with a smile as a form of greeting. "You're back. Oh, it seems that your harvest today is quite good. You managed to hunt 2 wild boars in such a short time." At this time, a woman's voice came from not far away. A middle-aged woman wearing cotton clothes and a very ordinary appearance came out of a wooden house not far away. "Little brother, come, let me introduce you. Rothko put one hand on Jianxin's shoulder and the other hand pointed at the middle-aged woman. He said, "This is my wife, her name is Fang Hui." "Hello, sister-in-law." Jianxin greeted Fang Hui in a friendly manner. Although it was the first time that Jianxin saw Rothko's wife, he had heard Fang Hui's voice many times in the past 10 days. Fang Hui's eyes fell on Jianxin's face. She smiled and said, "What a handsome young man. I already knew that my Rothko saved a person from the river. Today is the first time I see you. I didn't expect you to be such a handsome young man. But why is your face so red?" "Yes, little brother, I also noticed that your face is getting redder and redder these days. Are you okay? Is there any sequelae from your injury?" Rothko asked with a puzzled face. "Don't worry, uncle, this is probably because of the medicine I used. I'm fine." Jianxin waved his hand casually. Chapter 198. Jianxin ate lunch with Rothko's family at an old wooden table in a clean wooden hut. The food was extremely simple. There were only a few plates of vegetables they had grown and a small plate of wild beast meat. There were only 4 people in Rothko's family. Other than the 2 of them, there were only 2 10-year-old children. The couple constantly chatted with Jianxin at the table, but they did not mention Jianxin's injuries or family matters. They only asked Jianxin about the current situation on the Tianyuan continent and some interesting matters. After all, the Tianyuan continent was extremely dangerous. Rothko's wife, Fang Hui, had grown up in a mountain village. She had basically never ventured out in the past few decades. As for Rothko, he had once been a mercenary, but ever since his saint weapon shattered and he became a cripple, he had remained in the mountain village for over a decade. He had never ventured out during that time, so he was extremely curious about the outside world. Jianxin had only ventured out for a year or 2 on the Tianyuan continent, and he had stayed in a small, remote town during that time, but he did not hide anything from the couple. He would answer their questions from time to time as well. After the meal, Jianxin strolled around the other parts of the village under Rothko's lead. He got to know many of the people who lived in the village, and he gained a better understanding of the place. This was a village called the Huang clan. It was said that it had existed for over 100 years. It had been founded by a person with the surname Huang 100 years ago. In the beginning, it only had a few people living in a small courtyard. Although it had developed over 100 years ago, it had only expanded to around 30 households. The total population was only around 100 people. Excluding the elderly, children, and frail women, there were only 30 or 40 strong young men. All the people in the village made a living by farming. Occasionally, there would be a few young men who would go to the nearby river to hunt some wild beasts or catch some fish from the nearby river. This was how they made a living, living a life that did not involve themselves in worldly affairs. Rothko walked through the entire village with Jianxin in the afternoon. He basically introduced everyone in the village to Jianxin, and they only finished in the evening. At night, Rothko returned home with Jianxin. The 5 of them sat at the same table and ate dinner. The dinner was extremely simple, consisting of a bowl of rice and some vegetables. At this moment, a boy beside Jianxin suddenly raised his head and looked at Jianxin. He said timidly, "Brother Jianxin, I heard from my father that you're very powerful, right?" The girl beside Fang Hui also raised her head when she heard the boy's words. She stared at Jianxin curiously with her large, black eyes. The boy's name was Luojia, and the girl had the exact same name as the boy, Luojia. They were Rothko's 2 children. Jianxin immediately turned to the boy upon hearing this. He smiled and said, "Little Jianxin, the outside world is very big, and there are countless people who are more powerful than me. Once you become more powerful, you'll be able to see the outside world." As soon as Jianxin finished speaking, Rothko's daughter, Luojia, couldn't help but ask, "Brother Jianxin, who is more powerful than my father?" Rothko chuckled when he heard this. He looked at his 2 children with a gentle gaze and said, "Jia, don't underestimate Brother Jianxin. He may not be as old as me, but he's much more powerful than your father." Fang Hui's eyes immediately lit up when she heard that. She said to Jianxin, "Jianxin, if you don't mind our poverty, why don't you stay here? The Tianyuan continent is just too dangerous. Although life here is dull, it's still safe. I'll go to the village next door to find you a younger and prettier girl so you can get married. Jianxin bitterly smiled when he heard Feng Hui's words. Feng Hui's words were becoming more and more ridiculous. Thank you for your good intentions, sister-in-law, but I still have many things to do outside, so I can't stay here for too long, Jianxin bitterly smiled. That's enough. He has his own matters to attend to. A young man like him should spend more time on the Tianyuan continent because that's the stage for men. Stop wasting time here, Rothko said. After all, he was once a mercenary who had roamed the Tianyuan continent before, so he was much more open-minded. Feng Hui angrily glared at Rothko. She also felt rather disappointed inside. She had thought that if she could keep Jianxin, who was stronger than her husband, in the village, the men of the village would be able to hunt even more in the future. After dinner, Jianxin returned to the wooden hut he had stayed in for a few days to rest. The hut had originally been used to store miscellaneous items, but Rothko had cleared it out due to Jianxin's arrival. He had even prepared a bed for Jianxin to rest on. Closing the rather old wooden door, Jianxin returned to the somewhat sturdy wooden bed and sat down. He then took out a few Class 3 monster cores from his space pouch and held them in his hands, immediately beginning to cultivate. In the past half a month, Jianxin had completely removed the hidden problems within his body, so he could increase his strength as much as he wanted now. He no longer needed to worry about increasing his strength too quickly and causing the problems within him to worsen. The energy within the monster cores was absorbed by Jianxin at an extremely terrifying rate. As soon as the energy entered Jianxin's body, the berserk factor within the energy was immediately absorbed by the 2 specks of light in his dantian, along with at least 80 to 90% of the energy. Perhaps it was because Jianxin was absorbing the energy much faster than before. Although the 2 specks of light in his dantian had absorbed most of the energy from the monster cores, Jianxin was able to receive 10 to 20% of the energy. It was no longer like when he had just become a saint, where he could only receive 1% of the energy. Chapter 199. In the blink of an eye, another half a month had passed. By now, Jianxin had been in the Huang family village for more than a month. During this half a month, Jianxin rarely stepped out of his room. He locked himself in the wooden hut all day long and devoted himself to increasing his strength. He would only go out for a meal once every 3 or 4 days. Even so, he didn't stay outside for too long. As soon as he finished eating, he would immediately return to the wooden hut to continue cultivating. He rarely showed his face in front of outsiders. After half a month of cultivation, the saint force in Jianxin's body was growing at an extremely fast rate. At the same time, the monster cores in his space belt were being consumed at an extremely fast rate. Fortunately, he had already prepared enough Class 3 and Class 4 monster cores. Moreover, there were also some monster cores in the space belts that he had taken from the great Saint Masters in Fengyang City. Therefore, Jianxin didn't have to worry about running out of monster cores for a short period of time. Moreover, there were 2 Class 5 monster cores in his interspatial ring. Just these 2 Class 5 monster cores were enough to match up to over 100 Class 4 monster cores. With so many monster cores added together, it was enough to raise his strength to the great Saint Master level. Right now, Jianxin's strength had already reached the peak of the high-level Saint Master realm. There was only a thin barrier between him and the great Saint Master realm that was as thin as paper. At this final juncture, Jianxin stopped cultivating and slowly opened his eyes. At this moment, there was a trace of excitement in his calm eyes. He should have broken through to the great Saint Master realm more than a month ago. Unfortunately, because of the residual injuries in his body, he had no choice but to delay his breakthrough. Once he broke through to the great Saint Master realm, he would have enough power to take care of the Tianxiong clan in Wake City. Taking a deep breath, Jianxin slowly calmed his surging emotions. Then, he took out a dozen Class 4 monster cores from his space belt. They were the size of a child's fist and placed them in front of his legs to prepare for his breakthrough. This was because at the critical juncture of his breakthrough, he would need an extremely large amount of energy. At that time, he wouldn't have the time to take out the monster cores from his space belt. Therefore, these things had to be prepared before he broke through. After everything was prepared, Jianxin held a Class 4 monster core in each hand and slowly closed his eyes to enter a state of cultivation again. In the blink of an eye, another day had passed. At noon, Rothko, his wife Feng Hui, and 2 children were sitting in the hut, eating lunch. Isn't Jianxin cultivating too hard? In the past half a month, he's only come out for a meal once every 2 or 3 days. I really don't know how he's able to endure it. It's already been 4 whole days, but Jianxin hasn't taken a single step out of his room. Sigh, I'm really worried that he'll fall sick from exhaustion. Looking through the door, Feng Hui shook her head and sighed as she looked at a small wooden house with a tightly shut wooden door not far away. Her tone actually carried a trace of worry. Rothko chuckled when he heard that. You've never come in contact with Saint Force, so you'll never understand how wondrous Saint Force is. Jianxin really is working very hard on his cultivation, at least 100 times harder than I was in the past, but he'll never get sick from exhaustion. As for eating, there's no need to even mention it. On the Tianyuan continent, it's very normal for some powerful people to not eat for several days or even weeks. When I was out on missions in the past, my companions and I didn't eat for 4 or 5 days, but we were still alive and well as we fought against bandits. Feng Hui pouted in disdain when she heard that. She said, "You are you, and Jianxin is Jianxin. Don't forget that you were already in your 30s back then, while Jianxin was only in his early 20s. He was so skinny, so how could he compare to you?" Rothko gently sighed. You've never moved around the Tianyuan continent, so you don't know about this. Let me tell you, a person's strength has nothing to do with age. Some people with poor talent will never be able to condense a saint weapon and become a saint in their entire lives, while some people with good fortune and resources will reach heights that many mercenaries will never be able to reach in their entire lives. Take our village chief for example. He's already over 150 years old this year, but he's only a great saint. He's already the most powerful person in our village. On the other hand, our village chief's strength has barely reached the standard to graduate from some of the academies on the Tianyuan continent. There are many people below the age of 30 who possess the strength of our village chief. Feng Hui nodded with some understanding. She said after some thought, "You're right, but Jianxin might not be that powerful. After all, he's far too young." After hearing Feng Hui's words, Rothko was about to continue defending himself when suddenly, a gust of wind blew in from outside the house without any warning. It swept up a large amount of sand into the house, covering the few plates of vegetables on the table with sand. Oh no, why is there such a gust of wind all of a sudden? Rothko's face changed slightly, and he immediately ran over to close the door. Sob. Father, mother, sand has gotten into my eyes. I can't open them. Luo Jia covered her eyes as she sat at the table and sobbed. Feng Hui hurried over to Luo Jia's side and comforted her. "Good girl, don't cry. I'm here, so let me blow the sand away for you. Come, open your eyes." Rothko glanced back at the dishes on the table that were covered in sand. He hesitated slightly before sternly saying, "Stay in the room for now. I'll go out and take a look." This gust of wind came far too suddenly. There were no signs at all. It feels rather strange. With that, Rothko opened the door and walked out. The gust of wind continued to wreak havoc outside the room, kicking up dust into the air and blotting out the sun. Even the scorching sun in the sky was slightly dimmed by the thick layer of dust that had accumulated in the sky. Some of the clothes that had been hung outside had been blown high into the air by the gust of wind, where they danced in the wind. A large number of tiles on the roofs had been blown away. A few of the weaker wooden huts had even been blown apart by the gust of wind. What's going on? Why is there such a gust of wind all of a sudden? This gust of wind is so strange. It came all of a sudden, and it's so violent. In the distance, the villagers of the Huang village all walked out of their wooden huts. They were all extremely confused. Rothko casually looked around. When he accidentally glanced at Jianxin's hut, his eyes suddenly narrowed. This was because he suddenly discovered from the dust that the gust of wind seemed to be spreading out with Jianxin's hut as the center. Rothko, who had once roamed the Tianyuan continent and possessed the strength of a saint master, quickly deduced the truth from this phenomenon. His eyes immediately widened as he stared at Jianxin's hut in disbelief. He involuntarily cried out, "Is this caused by Jianxin's cultivation?" At that moment, Rothko's heart churned. He understood extremely well just how much strength was required to cause something like this. At the very least, he was nowhere close to being able to do something like this when he was a saint master over a decade ago. What filled him with even more disbelief was that Jianxin had already surpassed him in the past when he was only in his early 20s. I really was mistaken. The kid's strength is definitely greater than a saint master. He's probably a great saint master at the very least, Rothko sighed. Although he had become a cripple now, he still possessed his past experience, so he was able to estimate Jianxin's strength immediately. Everyone look, the gale seems to be blowing in that direction. An old voice vaguely rang out from the distance. A white-haired old man pointed in the direction of Jianxin's hut. With that, the others all turned their heads in the direction of Jianxin's hut. Someone immediately said, "The chief is right. The gale is indeed blowing in that direction. Look, the dust in the air is spreading in all directions. Let's go and take a look." "Yeah, let's go and see what's going on." Afterwards, the group of people followed the village chief to Jianxin's wooden hut. Rothko discovered their arrival as soon as possible. He hurriedly ran over to stop them and said, "Chief, let's not go over right now. We don't want to disturb Jianxin." "Rothko, what's going on?" "The gale seems to be blowing out from that hut," the chief said to Rothko. The village chief asked Rothko. His voice was filled with doubt, and his wrinkled old face was also very solemn. "Yeah, Rothko. What's in that hut? It can't be hiding some kind of treasure, right?" Someone immediately followed after the chief. "Yeah, Rothko. You're too unkind. You found a treasure, but you won't even let us take a look. Hurry up and take out the treasure so we can see it. I've never seen a treasure that can blow out wind before." Following that person's words, the others also thought that there must be some kind of treasure hidden in that hut, so they all started to make a ruckus. Everyone be quiet." Rothko hurriedly made a shushing gesture. After everyone quieted down, he lowered his voice and said innocently, "Please don't misunderstand, everyone. I don't have any treasure. This is clearly caused by Jianxin cultivating in that hut. According to my previous experience, this phenomenon should only appear when Jianxin reaches the most crucial moment of his cultivation. He should be most afraid of being disturbed at that moment, or there will be very serious consequences. It will be very disadvantageous for Jianxin. Let's go, let's all stay away and not disturb Jianxin's cultivation." "Oh, so that's how it is. That's impossible. I've seen Jianxin before. Why haven't I noticed that he's so powerful? He actually has the ability to summon wind and rain." "Rothko, you're not lying to us, are you?" everyone questioned. After all, they had all grown up in a mountain village. They had never been to the Tianyuan continent before, so many of them doubted Rothko's words. They did not believe that someone younger than them would possess such great ability. What they were witnessing right now was already an impressive ability in their eyes. The old village chief stared at Jianxin's hut for quite a while. Deep shock filled his eyes as well. He then sighed deeply and turned around. "Everyone, Rothko's words make a lot of sense. We'll know whether or not it's the same as what Rothko has said later. Let's stay away for now so that we don't disturb Jianxin." The old village chief clearly possessed great prestige in everyone's hearts. With his words, everyone immediately stopped talking and silently backed away. They only stopped when they were 50 meters away. They all stood there and stared at Jianxin's hut. The wind continued to wreak havoc in the surroundings, but it did not cover a large area. It only covered a radius of a few hundred meters, which was just enough to envelop the entire village. The crowd watched from 50 meters away for nearly an hour. During this time, even some of the old and frail people, as well as some women and children, left their houses one after another to watch what was happening here with curiosity in the face of the flying sand and sand. At this moment, almost all of the over 100 residents of the Huang village who were still able to move had gathered here to witness a scene that they had never seen before. If this happened on the Tianyuan continent, it might not have attracted the attention of anyone, but it was extremely novel in this isolated mountain village. Why do I feel more and more uncomfortable? It's so uncomfortable that even breathing is becoming extremely difficult. An old man suddenly rubbed his chest as he asked in confusion. Yes, I also feel very stuffy in my chest. It's so stuffy that I feel flustered. Moreover, I feel like I'm carrying something very heavy on my back. As soon as the old man finished speaking, a middle-aged man standing beside him also spoke up. Me too. My chest feels stuffy, as if there's a huge rock pressing down on my chest. I can't breathe. That's strange. You guys also feel the same way? I thought it was because I was feeling unwell somewhere. I also feel the same way. I have one too. Rothko was surprised when he heard everyone's discussion. He then seemed to think of something and his face changed slightly. He immediately called out, "Everyone back off. This is an invisible presence that only powerful people can give off. It will directly affect the people in the surroundings. Some peak experts can even directly suffocate people to death with just their presence alone." Everyone's faces changed drastically when they heard Rothko's words, including the old village chief. They backed off in a hurry, only stopping when they were 100 meters away. Many of them had no idea what a presence was, but they had clearly heard that a few peak experts could directly suffocate people to death with just their presence alone. Bang! Just when everyone had retreated to 100 meters away, a loud sound suddenly rang out. Jian Chen's wooden hut was instantly smashed to pieces, and then a figure smashed through the roof and shot into the sky like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, he flew 50 meters into the air. Jianchen floated 50 meters in the air and let out a long roar. The sound waves rolled out, spreading far and wide. Then, powerful and surging Saint Force gathered in his left hand. With a wave of his hand, a pure ball of light made of Saint Force flew out of his hand, whistling towards the ground in the distance. Boom! When the ball of energy hit the ground, it let out a loud boom, accompanied by a large amount of smoke and dust that slowly rose from the ground. When the smoke and dust dissipated, to everyone's shock, there was already a 2 to 3 meter wide and 5 meter deep crater. Surging Saint Force once again surged out of Jianchen's right hand, quickly condensing into a silver-white longsword. Under the illumination of the sun, the longsword reflected a dazzling light, making people not dare to look at it directly. This longsword seemed to be even more dazzling than the sun in the sky. With a flash of silver light, the longsword pierced through the air with lightning speed. A sharp sword chi with a dazzling light broke free from the longsword's shackles and shot into the ground a few hundred meters away. It silently sank into the hard ground, leaving only a very small crack on the surface. There was not a single crack in the surrounding area. After this stab, Jianchen's body slowly landed on the ground. Although he could reach a height of 50 meters in a single leap, he could only stay in the air for less than a breath of time. Chapter 200. 100 meters away, the villagers of the Huang family village all stared at Jianchen with dumbfounded expressions on their faces. A loud roar could be heard from several kilometers away. He leaped 50 meters into the air and punched the ground more than 100 meters away, causing a loud boom and sending the soil flying. This scene had already made the group of people completely stunned. Some of them even stopped thinking. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the scene in front of them had completely overturned their understanding of the world. After all, most of the villagers had lived their entire lives in this small mountain village. They rarely ventured out, so they had no idea just how strong the outside world was. Even the village chief, who was a great saint, had only heard of the outside world and didn't know much about it. But Jianchen had jumped 50 meters into the air and punched the ground over 100 meters away. This was the first time they had seen such a scene. At this moment, the villagers' gazes towards Jianchen had completely changed. Their gazes were filled with worship and respect, but there was also a trace of shock and disbelief. Even though they had seen it with their own eyes, they still found it hard to believe that a young man in his early 20s could actually wield such power. Feeling the surging Saint Force in his body, Jianchen felt a strong sense of confidence. Although his current strength was not enough to contend against an Earth Saint Master, if he were to encounter a group of great Saint Masters again, he would not be forced to flee in such a sorry state. In the end, he was forced to use the sword manipulation ability to escape. Jianxin's gaze paused on the light wind sword in his right hand for a moment. After breaking through from Saint Master to Great Saint Master, he could clearly feel that his saint weapon had also changed. The current light wind sword was even brighter than before. The pure white mirror-like blade emitted a layer of hazy white light. Although it didn't look like much, this faint layer of light was able to pierce through metal and stone. It contained an unimaginable amount of attack power. Other than that, the hardness of the light wind sword had also increased by a large margin. Jianxin was confident that even if the difference between an Earth Saint Master and a Great Saint Master was like the difference between heaven and earth, it would still be very difficult for someone to destroy the light wind sword in his hand. Slowly putting away the light wind sword, Jianxin looked around. When he saw the small wooden house that had been destroyed, he couldn't help but bitterly smile. Walking over to Rothko, who was 100 meters away, he said apologetically, "Uncle, I'm really sorry for destroying your house." Even though Rothko was shocked by Jianxin's strength as well, he was once a mercenary after all, so he suppressed his shock very quickly. He patted Jianxin's shoulder heavily and laughed, It's fine. It's just a house. We'll just have to cut down a few trees and rebuild it. Kid, I've really misjudged you. I never thought that you would be so powerful at such a young age. You've really surprised me." Rothko's voice was filled with excitement and joy. Little brother Jianxin is too polite. It's just a wooden house. We'll be able to rebuild it in a few hours. However, little brother Jianxin's display of strength has really opened my eyes. Don't you all agree? The old village chief chuckled. His tone was very amiable. That's right. Following the old village chief's words, the villagers behind him all agreed and looked at Jianxin with worship in their eyes. At this time, the old village chief lightly exclaimed. His pair of old eyes stared closely at Jianxin's face and strangely asked, "Little brother Jianxin, why did your face turn white? I remember that your face was still red a few days ago." Hearing this, without waiting for Jianxin to speak, Rothko spoke first. Village chief, little brother's skin was originally white. A few days ago, he took some medicine to heal his injuries and that's why his face turned red. The village chief suddenly understood and laughed. White is good, white is good, white is good, white is even better looking. I didn't think that little brother Jianxin is not only strong, but also handsome. With this appearance, I reckon that a lot of girls will fall for you. This sentence caused the villagers to burst into laughter, but no one doubted the old village chief's words. Everyone agreed with this point of view. Jianxin's face showed a trace of a bitter smile. The old village chief's words made him speechless. At this time, Jianxin's face suddenly changed, and then his whole body began to tremble violently. Then, a powerful aura uncontrollably spread out from his body, pushing the group of villagers in front of him back. Some even fell to the ground because of this. At this time, Jianxin's originally white face had turned purple on one side and green on the other. Even in the depths of his eyes, a purple and green light would occasionally appear, but it was very weak. Rothko was pushed back more than 20 meters by Jianxin's aura before gradually stabilizing his body. When he raised his head and looked at Jianxin with a puzzled expression, he immediately discovered that something was wrong with Jianxin. His heart sank and he hurriedly asked, "Young man, what happened to you?" Jianxin's whole body was slightly trembling. The muscles on his face were constantly trembling, and even his eyes were flickering with purple and green light. Jianxin said with great difficulty, then immediately sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes. "What's going on? Little brother Jianxin, what's going on? Could there be a problem with his cultivation? What's going on with little brother Jianxin?" A group of villagers stood in the distance, all of them staring at Jianxin who was sitting cross-legged on the ground in confusion, all of them talking at once. Rothko's face became extremely serious. He was once a saint master, but only became a cripple because his saint weapon was destroyed, so he understood a lot more than the villagers who had always lived here. From Jianxin's state just now, he already realized that something might have happened to Jianxin's cultivation. Chapter 201. Jianxin's body, which was sitting cross-legged on the ground, was constantly trembling. Inside his dantian, his entire dantian seemed to be experiencing an earthquake. It was shaking violently as a purple and green light flickered within his dantian, illuminating it from time to time. As for the light wind sword that was floating in his dantian, it was completely condensed from Saint Qi, and it was also greatly affected, causing it to constantly tremble. The two specks of light, one violet and one azure, had appeared in his dantian ever since he had condensed a saint weapon in Kargath Academy and become a saint. At this moment, they suddenly emitted a dazzling light. They revolved around each other in the form of a yin and yang diagram. Sensing the changes in his body, Jianxin's good mood from breaking through to the great saint master levels suddenly sank. The two specks of light that had been residing in his dantian ever since he became a saint had finally begun to cause trouble at this moment. Although the sudden changes in his dantian had caught Jianxin by surprise, he didn't appear to be too flustered. This was because he had long since anticipated that this day would come. He just hadn't thought that it would come so suddenly, giving him no time to prepare. The two dots of light in his dantian were intertwining with each other in the form of a yin-yang symbol. They continuously rotated in his dantian. The saint weapon that was constantly trembling in his dantian also seemed to be breaking free from a layer of invisible shackles around it, breaking free from Jianxin's control. At the same time, Jianxin could faintly feel that the two dots of light had a very faint feeling of excitement in them. Jianxin couldn't help but feel that it was inconceivable. In his heart, Jianxin was very puzzled. Just what were the two dots of light in his dantian? Why did he feel emotional fluctuations from them more than once? Especially when he had encountered a strange white stone in Wake City. It was very strong and left a very deep impression on Jianxin. Although he was very curious, at this time, Jianxin clearly didn't have the time to think about these questions. He sat cross-legged on the ground and tried his best to suppress the saint weapon in his dantian. Right now, he didn't have the strength to do anything else. Furthermore, the place where the two dots of light were entrenched in his dantian was a forbidden area to him. Although it was in his own body, he couldn't control it at all. Therefore, there was really nothing that he could do about the two dots of light. The only thing he could do was to watch from the side and pray in his heart that things wouldn't develop too badly. The purple and green dots of light in his dantian rotated faster and faster, and the purple and green light emitted became more and more intense. It illuminated Jianxin's entire inner palace. Finally, the intense and dazzling light directly penetrated Jianxin's body and spread out from Jianxin's body. Right now, Jianxin's entire body was emitting a purple and green light. One side was purple, the other was green. The light spread out to a distance of 20 to 30 meters. In front of this intense and dazzling purple and green light, even the rays of the scorching sun in the sky paled in comparison. Hey, look, Jianxin's body is glowing. Strange, why is his body glowing? He can't be cultivating some legendary divine technique, right? Seeing Jianxin's current appearance, a group of villagers in the distance were all shocked. They pointed at Jianxin and discussed spiritedly. To them, who had lived in a mountain village all their lives, this scene in front of them was clearly so magical. At this time, the purple and green dots of light in Jianxin's dantian suddenly rushed out of his dantian. Bringing along two streams of light, they rushed towards Jianxin's brain at lightning speed. Damn it! Jianxin's face suddenly changed. However, the purple and green dots of light were very fast. Just as Jianxin realized that something was wrong, the two dots of light had already rushed into his brain. Boom! Jianxin only felt a muffled explosion in his head. Immediately after, he felt the sky and earth spinning, and his consciousness gradually became somewhat blurry. Unknowingly, Jianxin seemed to have arrived in a strange world. This was a stretch of endless mountain range. The mountains were beautiful, and the world's spiritual qi was incomparably abundant. On the ground, there were numerous rivers running through the mountain range. The winding bodies of the rivers were like divine dragons. and the plants and towering ancient trees in the mountain range were all exuding a vigorous vitality that pervaded the world. Looking at it, it was simply a fairyland. Right at this moment, two streaks of light, one purple and one green, flew over from afar like shooting stars with two long tails. They were so fast that they covered a distance of 108,000 kilometers in the blink of an eye. The two streaks of light intertwined with each other as if they were a pair of loving lovers flying over the mountain range. Through the dense purple and green light, one could vaguely see that within the light were two divine swords with incomparable charm. One was completely purple, and the other was completely green. Xing sword, Qing Sua sword. When seeing these two divine swords, the names of these two divine swords appeared in Jianshan's mind inexplicably. When Jianshan's consciousness entered this strange world, his body also underwent a great change. The purple and green light emitted from the surface of his body had all gathered above his head, transforming into two divine swords, one purple and one green, that were more than 10 meters tall. From afar, it was as if two incomparably huge swords were stuck in Jianshan's head. At the same time, an incomparably powerful sword intent was emitted from Jianshan's body. It soared into the sky, dispersing many of the thin clouds in the sky. All of the villagers standing over 100 meters away were completely rooted to the spot. None of them dared to even blink as they stared intently at the two divine swords above Jianshan's head. This was an extremely miraculous scene in their eyes. In a massive imperial palace extremely far away from the Huang family village, an elderly man in a long white robe was seated with his legs crossed in midair, hovering 3 meters above the ground with his eyes tightly shut. Right at this moment, the elderly man suddenly opened his eyes, and in the instant that he did so, two beams of divine light shot forth from his eyes like lightning, piercing through space. He stared up ahead with a sharp gaze, and it was as if he could see through the buildings up ahead and see what was going on outside. What a powerful aura! What is this thing? Why haven't I sensed it before? The elderly man's brows furrowed slightly as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Could it be that another top-tier powerful being has been born somewhere? In a small mountain village, an old man wearing a linen garment that had several patches all over it suddenly raised his head and cast his gaze toward the direction of the Huang clan's village. His calm gaze seemed to be able to see through everything in this world. This is sword intent. What powerful sword intent! I wonder who it is that possesses such great mastery over the way of the sword. Why haven't I heard of it before? Have some new experts appeared on the Tianyuan continent during the years that I've been in seclusion? The old man murmured. His voice was filled with some surprise. At the same time, many peak experts across the continent sensed the extremely powerful sword intent from afar, and they were all extremely surprised. The Huang family village. Jianshan had already sat on the ground for 2 whole hours. At this moment, all of the villagers had gathered 100 meters away. They stared at the two divine swords above Jianshan's head as they discussed softly. Everyone look! Something's happening! Suddenly, someone in the crowd called out. With that voice, the two divine swords above Jianshan's head gradually dimmed. A few seconds later, the two divine swords completely vanished. Before long, Jianshan finally opened his eyes slowly. His eyes were filled with deep shock and disbelief. Sucking in a deep breath, Jianshan slowly stood up from the ground. Although only 2 hours had passed, he had learned many things for some unknown reason during that time. He had finally understood the problem with the specks of light in his dantian that had always troubled him. However, Jianshan still found the truth to be unbelievable. Even with his mental fortitude, he struggled to accept it for a moment. Rothko slowly arrived before Jianshan and carefully observed Jianshan. He asked in concern, "Kid, are you all right? You gave me quite a fright earlier." Jianshan gently shook his head and said, "I'm fine, uncle. I'm rather tired. Can you find me a quiet room? I want to rest for a while." Rothko immediately let out a sigh of relief when he heard Jianshan's words. At the very least, he had confirmed that Jianshan was fine. That's good, that's good. There are a few unoccupied wooden houses in our village. They're close to the edge of the village and are rather remote. That's the only place that's relatively quiet. Let's go, kid. I'll take you there. Afterwards, Rothko took Jianshan to a small wooden house at the edge of the village. The wooden house was clearly reserved as a spare. It was empty inside, and there wasn't even a basic bed. Jianshan rejected Rothko's suggestion of adding a wooden bed for him. He casually found an excuse to tell Rothko not to let anyone disturb him before he came out. Afterwards, he locked himself in the house. There wasn't much light in the wooden house, so it was rather dark. Jianshan sat on the ground with his legs crossed as he slowly digested the information that had appeared in his head out of nowhere. After the miraculous scene earlier, Jianshan finally understood what the two specks of light in his dantian were. They were actually the sword spirits of two swords. The two swords were called the Ziying sword and the Qing Suo sword. They possessed the power to destroy the world. The sword spirits of the two swords were formed from a bit of yin and yang qi that leaked out from the world when chaos first formed. After countless years of evolution, they finally formed a bit of spirituality. Afterwards, a powerful immortal obtained them. Based on the characteristics of the two spiritualities, he gathered all the top-grade materials in the world that contained yin and yang qi. After many years of refinement, he finally formed the two swords, one purple and one green. At the same time, he channeled the righteous energy of the world into the swords and used his own essence blood to water them. Only then did they become divine swords. When the swords were formed, the world shook and 5 bolts of lightning descended, announcing the birth of the divine weapons. Chapter 202. These two swords were called the yin-yang twin swords because the sword spirits were born from yin and yang qi, as well as the special materials used to forge them. Xing was yang, while Qing Suo was yin. The two swords were naturally a couple. When the two swords fused, it was the intersection of yin and yang. At that time, the fused swords would possess the power to destroy the world. It was said to be able to split open the world with endless power. Although the two swords would possess the power to split open the world after fusing, the two swords were yin and yang. In terms of their attributes, they just happened to be incompatible like fire and water, so it was extremely difficult to fuse them. Moreover, during the process of fusing, once the balance between yin and yang was lost, the yin and yang would be thrown into chaos, resulting in a huge backlash. Not only would it not be able to harm the enemy, but it would also harm the user. In light cases, the user would be heavily injured while wielding the sword. In heavy cases, the user would die. In the past, the Azulite swords had gone through a great battle. Due to the failure of the fusion of the two swords, both the swords and their masters became extremely injured, while the swords were destroyed. Only two sword spirits, formed from the yin and yang qi that had leaked out from the beginning of chaos, survived. In the end, they hid in a spirit vein underground and slowly recovered. This information was transmitted to Jianshan through an extremely profound method when the sword spirits charged into Jianshan's mind. It seemed to be a kind of communication. At the same time, Jianshan also understood that the sword spirits of the Azulite swords had suffered a huge backlash due to the failed fusion. They had yet to fully recover from their injuries, so they were extremely weak right now. In the past, when he wasn't a great Saint Master, they were unable to communicate with him. Only when he had just become a great Saint Master could they barely communicate with him. Even so, they still needed to enter his consciousness to do so. Jianshan slowly digested the information he had just received. The two specks of light in his dantian were actually the sword spirits of the two swords. Moreover, they already possessed their own consciousness and could think independently. Jianshan found this difficult to accept. However, he was not an ordinary person. Even though all of this was so unbelievable, he calmed down very quickly and accepted it all. Jianshan sat cross-legged on the ground and slowly closed his eyes, entering his inner vision. The scene within his body appeared in Jianshan's mind. Right now, the saint weapon that had been constantly trembling in his dantian and trying to break free from Jianshan's control had completely stabilized. It silently floated there like a docile little lamb. The only difference was that the two specks of light that had originally occupied a corner of his dantian had now moved below the saint weapon. They were slowly revolving around each other in the form of a taiji diagram. Although the two specks of light were still in Jianxin's body, Jianxin's heart had completely calmed down. The unknown was the most terrifying, and the uncontrollable was the most fatal. In the past, before he knew the identity of the two specks of light, Jianxin had indeed been on tenterhooks for a few days. However, it was different now. Now that he completely understood the identity of the two specks of light, he could finally relax completely. At this moment, Jianxin was extremely happy. Suddenly, he realized that he had never felt so relaxed ever since he had become a saint. Slowly opening his eyes, Jianxin revealed a faint smile. He then slowly raised his right hand. The two specks of light, one purple and one azure, suddenly appeared in his right hand, forming a faint pillar of light that pulsed in and out of Jianxin's hand. The two specks of light spiraled around each other, as if they were an intimate couple. However, they did not invade each other. No matter how they changed in Jianxin's hand, they would never collide. The two specks of light were the power of the sword spirits. Now, Jianxin was able to use the power of the sword spirits. Although the power of the sword spirits did not seem very eye-catching, only Jianxin could sense just how terrifying the sword qi within the specks of light was. Even though it was only a sliver of the sword spirit's power, just this sliver of power was enough to make Jianxin tremble. It was a tremble that came from the bottom of his heart. The sword qi of the sword spirits had already reached a level where it could not be sensed at all. It could be said that the specks of light were completely condensed from extremely pure sword qi. With the help of the sword spirits, my strength has increased by leaps and bounds once more. Now, even if I encounter an Earth Saint Master again, I'll be able to exchange 300 blows with him with the help of the sword spirits. Jianxin's face was filled with excitement as he looked at the specks of sword qi in his hand. The appearance of the sword spirits made Jianxin extremely happy. Not only had they resolved a problem that he had always been worried about, but they had also increased his strength once more. Jianxin remained in the gloomy wooden hut for a very long time before he finally calmed down. After tidying up his clothes, he stood up and left the hut. 50 meters away from the hut, all the villagers of the village were gathered there. They stared at the hut as they discussed softly. Due to Rothko's warnings, no one dared to make too much noise. They also stayed far away from the hut so as to not disturb Jianxin as much as possible. Jianxin's performance today had broadened the horizons of the villagers who had never been to the Tianyuan continent. Only now did they understand just how powerful the experts of the outside world were. At the same time, Jianxin had become the idol of all the young men in the village. Creak! At this moment, the wooden door of the hut suddenly opened. At the same time, the villagers who had gathered around 50 meters away fell silent. Over 100 pairs of eyes stared at Jianxin in unison. Jianxin smiled at the sight of the large group of people gathered there. It had only been an hour since he had entered the hut. "I'm fine now. You can all leave now. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience I've caused everyone today. Please forgive me," Jianxin said in an extremely sincere manner as he clasped his hands together. After Jianxin finished speaking, the entire village fell silent for a while. In the end, it was Rothko who broke the silence. "Are you all right now, young man?" Rothko's voice was filled with concern. Jianxin smiled. "Thank you for your concern, uncle. The problem with my body has been completely resolved." "Jianxin, forgive me for asking, but did you just break through to a higher level of cultivation?" the old village chief asked. Afterwards, a group of curious villagers completely surrounded Jianxin, asking him all sorts of questions. As long as it was something that could be answered, Jianxin would answer all of their questions. Chapter 203. After this incident, the entire Huang family village viewed Jianxin in a completely different light. The next morning, as soon as the sun peeked through the horizon, a series of chaotic noises rang out from outside the Huang family village. Jianxin slowly opened his eyes as he sat on his bed with his legs crossed. He had spent the entire night familiarizing himself with the method to control the Azure and Azure Sword Qi. After learning about the identities of the Azure and Azure Sword spirits, Jianxin was able to draw upon some of their power, and this was the Azure and Azure Sword Chi. This was an extremely powerful power, but it was still rather unfamiliar to Genshin. If he didn't familiarize himself with it, he wouldn't be able to use it as freely as an extension of his arm. As such, it would take some time for Genshin to familiarize himself with this new power. Genshin slowly got out of bed, pushed open the door, and made his way out of the wooden hut, breathing in the fresh morning air to his heart's content. The wooden hut that he was currently residing in was still the same one, but it had been rebuilt by the villagers of the Huang family village in less than 2 hours. Outside, many people in the Huang family village were already moving about in the courtyard. Not far away, Rothko's son, Luojia, was wielding a wooden machete and hacking at the air with all his might as he yelled incessantly. At this moment, Luojia caught sight of Genshin, and a look of reverence immediately appeared in his eyes. He then quickly ran over to Genshin and stared at Genshin with an eager expression as he said, "Big brother Genshin, you're so powerful. Can you teach me martial arts?" Genshin smiled as he stroked Luojia's head and asked, "Tell me, Luojia, what kind of weapon do you want to use in the future?" Luojia raised the wooden machete in his hand with an innocent look on his face as he replied, "A machete, a very big machete, just like this one." "No, a machete that's even bigger than this one." "Luojia, the bigger the weapon, the harder it is to control it. When you become a saint in the future, you must not be careless when condensing a saint weapon. You must control the size of the saint weapon according to your physical condition. Do you understand?" Genshin's face was solemn. This question was indeed very crucial. It could directly affect a person's highest achievement and combat strength. Luojia nodded obediently. "Luojia, I am not proficient in knife skills, so I don't know much about knife skills. But I can explain some of the most basic things." Genshin then explained to Luojia some basic knowledge and things to pay attention to in practice. These things were not only very important to Luojia, but also the most practical. After all, how high a person could achieve in the future depended not only on his talent, but also on his basic skills. If he did not pay attention to his basic skills and crazily increased his strength, it would seriously damage his foundation. Although Genshin had fought with many masters who used knives in his previous life and had a rough understanding of knife skills, it was still too early for him to tell Luojia all this. Genshin explained to Luojia for an hour before he finished. At this time, Rothko and a few men carrying weapons walked over from afar. When they arrived in front of Genshin, Rothko smiled and said, "Young man, why are you up so early today?" "Ha, you have been here for more than a month. Today is the first time I have seen you up so early." Hearing this, Genshin smiled and glanced at the weapons on Rothko's shoulders. He said, "Uncle, looking at your equipment, are you going hunting in the mountains?" Rothko nodded slightly and said, "Yes, the meat in the village is almost gone, so we have to go hunting again." "Haha, I don't know if Genshin is free. Why don't you go to the mountains and help us kill a few wild beasts? You are so powerful. With you around, we will definitely have a bountiful harvest." A middle-aged man standing next to Rothko laughed and looked at Genshin expectantly. Genshin nodded and said, "Anyway, I am quite free right now. Why don't I go hunting with everyone? I can also learn some hunting experience." It had been over a month since Genshin had arrived at the Huang village, and during that time, he hadn't done anything for the Huang village. Now that he had recovered from his injuries, Genshin was planning to leave, so he wanted to do something for the Huang village before he left to repay the kindness they had shown him during the past half a month. When they heard that Genshin had agreed, the men who were preparing to go hunting were all very happy. They had seen Genshin's strength with their own eyes. It was definitely incomparable. Now, they were all guessing in their hearts how rich their harvest would be this time. Soon after, Genshin followed the men to a mountain 10 miles away. Although this mountain was far from being comparable to the magical Beast Mountain range outside of Wake City, it still covered a large area. There were weeds and trees all over the mountain. Generally, only some wild beasts would appear here. Rank 1 magical beasts were very rare. Genshin's team had a total of 7 people. Among the 7 people, only one other than Genshin had condensed a saint weapon. The rest, including Rothko, were all holding iron weapons. If we go deeper, we will encounter large wild beasts like wild boars. A bare-chested middle-aged man led the way. He was the only saint in the group aside from Jianqin. His name was Cadus. However, due to his mediocre talent in cultivation and the fact that he did not have a supply of monster cores, coupled with the fact that he was not diligent in his cultivation, he was only a mid-saint even though he was almost 50 years old. At this time, several people began to slow down their pace and became cautious. Although there were wild beasts here, they could still cause harm to him. Jianqin followed the group silently. He would glance around from time to time, and his ears would twitch slightly from time to time as he tried to catch any movement in the surroundings. Just as the group carefully moved forward for a while, Jianqin suddenly revealed a strange smile. He then picked up a small stone from the ground and threw it to the side like lightning. Immediately, there was a sound from the weeds 20 meters away, and then there was no sound. The sudden commotion made Rothko and the others nervous. All of them held their weapons as if they were about to face a great enemy. Seeing their nervous expressions, Jianqin couldn't help but reveal a trace of amusement. He waved his hand and said, "Don't be nervous, follow me." Then, the group followed behind Jianqin and walked through the weeds. They saw a 2-meter-long, black beast lying on the ground with bright red blood flowing out of its head. This is a tiger. When they recognized this beast, apart from Rothko, the others were somewhat surprised. Tiger-type beasts could be said to be the most ferocious type of beast. Not only were their attacks extremely strong, but their movements were also very agile. Normally, even if the 6 of them worked together, they would have to go through a bitter battle to kill a tiger. Moreover, there was no guarantee that no one would be injured. But Jianqin had so easily killed a tiger that was extremely difficult to deal with in their eyes. This made them worship Jianqin even more in their hearts. There was also a deep sense of envy mixed within. Sigh. Looking at the black tiger lying on the ground, Rothko sighed softly. His expression suddenly became somewhat complicated. Scenes of the past uncontrollably flashed through his mind again. Thinking back, not to mention killing a wild beast, even dealing with a first-rank magical beast was something that could be done with a wave of his hand. But now, ever since his holy weapon was destroyed and he was reduced to a cripple, he was only left with a body that was much stronger than ordinary people. Even so, to hunt wild beasts, he still needed to form a group with others. Noticing the change in Rothko, Jianqin seemed to know what Rothko was thinking. He sighed inwardly. He could understand Rothko's feelings, but he couldn't find any suitable words to comfort him. "Everyone, clean up this beast and take it away. Let's continue on our way," Jianqin said indifferently. Okay, next, Jianqin led everyone to wander around the mountain, looking for wild beasts to hunt. But because Jianqin, a great saint master, was taking the lead, everyone's harvest today was very bountiful. In just half a day, everyone was holding a space belt that Jianqin gave them. The space belt was filled with all kinds of wild beasts. It could be said that the amount of wild beasts in these space belts was enough to match their harvest in half a year. Now, Jianqin was walking at the front of the group. However, just as Jianqin pushed aside some weeds blocking the way, his forward steps suddenly stopped. About 2 meters away from Jianqin, a person covered in blood was lying unconscious on the ground. His body was covered in wounds. Jianqin was slightly stunned. Then he quickly walked up to the person and squatted down. His right hand reached out to the person's nose and his left hand pressed against the person's heart. "He's still breathing, he's not dead." Soon, Jianqin's eyes lit up, and he immediately made up his mind to save the person. At this moment, everyone else also emerged from the weeds. They naturally immediately discovered the unconscious person lying on the ground, and they immediately looked at one another. Jianqin looked at everyone and hesitated momentarily. Then he immediately lifted the person up from the ground and said, "He's not dead yet, but he's on his last breath. Let's go back right away." "That's right, saving the person is more important. Let's hurry back." Huang Family Village. The news that Jianqin and the others had saved someone from hunting spread very quickly. It immediately aroused the curiosity of many people. They all came to watch. Everyone was guessing whether or not the person who came back this time would be someone like Xianxia, someone who was skilled in martial arts. There were already over 20 people gathered outside Xianxia's small wooden cabin, and everyone was discussing in low voices. Chapter 204. Although the person who had been saved by Xianxia was not dead yet, he was on the verge of death. There was no good medicine to heal him in this remote mountain village, so Xianxia could only use Radiant Saint Force to save his life. Under the treatment of Radiant Saint Force, the person finally broke free from the summons of the King of Hell. The severe injuries in his body stabilized very quickly. As soon as his wounds stabilized, Xianxia stopped healing him with Radiant Saint Force. He did not want to reveal his identity as a Radiant Saint Master, so it was impossible for him to heal all the wounds in one go. Standing before the bed, Xianxia carefully studied the person he had saved. The person wore blue robes, and from his appearance, he seemed to be around 27 or 28 years old. He was a rather handsome young man. At this moment, the young man's tightly shut eyes slowly opened. He looked around in confusion before his gaze stopped on Xianxia for a while. His confused eyes gradually cleared up. "Did you save me?" The young man looked at Xianxia and asked in an extremely weak voice. Xianxia nodded. "That's right. I was the one who saved you. Thank you, benefactor, for saving my life. I will repay you in the future." The young man's voice was filled with gratitude. Xianxia smiled. "Let's not talk about this for now. Whether you repay me or not can be discussed later. I was also saved by someone before. The two of us do have some similarities." Hearing this, the young man smiled warmly. "I am Ming Dong. How should I address you, benefactor?" Xianxia sat down on a stool in front of the window and smiled. "You can just call me Xianxia. There's no need to call me benefactor. The injuries on your body are very serious. If I hadn't rescued you from the mountain and used the best healing medicine to stabilize your internal injuries, I'm afraid you would only be able to hold on for half a day at most before dying." Ming Dong's eyes filled with intense hatred when he heard that. He gritted his teeth. "I will make those bastards pay the price sooner or later." Xianxia sat before the bed and stared at Ming Dong with some interest. He pointed at the vicious wounds on Ming Dong's body and asked, "Were these wounds caused by your enemies?" "They weren't." Ming Dong shook his head. "I originally discovered a heavily injured Class 4 magical beast and was on the brink of death. In the end, I killed it with some effort, but as soon as I removed its monster core, a group of mercenaries discovered me and tried to steal it. If it was any one of them, I would not have been afraid, but they relied on their numbers, and not only did they heavily injure me, they even stole my space belt. In the end, I basically risked my life to escape from them. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have survived until now." Xianxia sighed inside when he heard that. What Ming Dong had encountered was common on the Tianyuan continent. It basically happened every day. This was a world where the strong reigned supreme, so strength was extremely important. Without enough strength, it would be very difficult for you to survive on the Tianyuan continent. Even if you kept a low profile and did not offend anyone, you would not necessarily be able to live a peaceful life because some troubles would just fall from the sky. They could not be avoided just because you wanted to. Afterward, Xianxia chatted with Ming Dong and gradually gained a better understanding of him. Ming Dong was a child from a village. Fortunately, his talent for cultivation was pretty good. Coupled with his diligence, he was already a mid-saint master at the age of 28. With such a cultivation speed, he could be considered as one of the top talents on the Tianyuan continent. Since he was used to living a free life, he had always been alone. He was a solo mercenary and was unwilling to join any mercenary group, so his freedom was restricted. All these years, Ming Dong had been constantly completing some mercenary missions and hunting some low-level demonic beasts to obtain demonic cores. Apart from exchanging a portion of the demonic cores for money, the rest of the demonic cores were used for his own cultivation. Therefore, his strength was something that few people of the same age could surpass. Xianxia could not help but raise his opinion of Ming Dong slightly after receiving this information. Just the fact that Ming Dong could hunt magical beasts alone was enough to tell that he was extraordinary. Moreover, his talent and diligence in cultivation were the most important factors on the path to becoming an expert. At that moment, Xianxia could not help but feel a sense of appreciation. He was almost certain that if Ming Dong was properly nurtured, he would definitely achieve great things in the future. After all, having mid-level sacred expert level strength at the age of 28 wasn't something just anyone could do. This was especially the case when this person's strength was completely obtained through his own hard work. He wasn't a disciple from a great family, a genius who was smashed through countless heavenly treasures. Looking at the pale-faced Ming Dong with mixed feelings, Xianxia hesitated slightly before finally saying, "Ming Dong, I wonder if you're willing to join my mercenary group. After everything that has happened, you should understand that joining a group is not necessarily a bad thing at times." Ming Dong hesitated when he heard that. He had already fallen in love with a free life. He really did not want to be restricted by joining a mercenary group. Otherwise, he would have been able to join a powerful mercenary group long ago with his strength. After hesitating for a while, Ming Dong could not help but go against his nature when he thought about how Xianxia had saved his life. He finally made up his mind and said, "Since Brother Xianxia doesn't mind, I'll join your mercenary group." Xianxia smiled happily when he heard that. He laughed aloud, "All right, Ming Dong. With your addition, our mercenary group will become even more powerful. In the future, we'll definitely become the greatest mercenary group on the Tianyuan continent." Xianxia could not help but think of something Uncle Kendall had once said when he reached there. "My greatest wish is for our flame mercenaries to become the greatest mercenary group on the Tianyuan continent." Now, Xianxia had already treated Uncle Kendall's wish as his own. He would replace Uncle Kendall and make the flame mercenaries the greatest mercenary group on the Tianyuan continent. "Oh right, I still don't know what our mercenary group is called, how many people there are, how powerful they are, and who the captain is," Ming Dong asked. Xianxia faintly smiled and said, "Our mercenary group is called the Raging Flame Mercenary Group. Originally, there was only me in the group, but now that you've joined, our mercenary group now has 2 people. As for strength, I have the strength of an initial great Saint Master." Chapter 205. With the addition of Ming Dong, Xianxia's flame mercenaries basically gained a new member. In the past, he was not powerful enough, but now that Xianxia was a great Saint Master and had the assistance of the Sword Spirits, he could even put up a fight against an Earth Saint Master. As a result, he needed to slowly develop the flame mercenaries. Xianxia stayed in the village for 2 days. 2 days later, Xianxia bid farewell to everyone in the village. He planned on leaving for a while. Ming Dong continued to recuperate on his bed in the wooden hut. He stared at Xianxia, who stood by the window, and said, "Xianxia, once I've recovered, I'll be leaving the village. Where will I go to find you then?" Xianxia sank into his thoughts when he heard that. He said, "I've already used up all the medicine I have on me, so you can only rely on yourself to slowly recover. I estimate that you'll need around a month to fully recover. I'm leaving this time to deal with some personal matters. I'll be back in a few days or a month at most. Just stay here and recuperate." With that, Xianxia took out a space belt, 8 Class 4 monster cores, and some purple crystal coins. He continued, "If I still haven't returned by the time you've recovered, you can cultivate here for now. With your talent and the assistance of Class 4 monster cores, your strength will increase relatively quickly. If I don't return after a long time, you can leave on your own." Ming Dong immediately became stunned when he saw the 8 Class 4 monster cores that Xianxia had taken out. Class 4 monster cores were relatively precious in his eyes. He had never used one before. Just a few days ago, he had almost lost his life for a single Class 4 monster core. Yet now, Xianxia had taken out 8 Class 4 monster cores for him to cultivate. Ming Dong struggled to accept this for a moment. A while later, Ming Dong sucked in a deep breath and slowly suppressed his excitement. He extended his trembling hand and accepted the items from Xianxia. He looked at Xianxia with mixed feelings and said, "I won't say words of thanks. Anyway, I'll remember your kindness." Ming Dong was a person who knew how to repay kindness. Not only had Xianxia saved his life, but he had also given him such precious items. At this moment, Ming Dong had already made up his mind to follow Jianshan from now on. This was because he knew very well that if he hadn't been saved by Jianshan, he probably wouldn't have been able to see the sun in the outside world. Furthermore, Jianshan was already a great sacred master at such a young age. This also meant that Jianshan's talent in cultivation was much greater than his own. There was no harm in following someone like him. After dealing with Ming Dong's matters, Jianshan didn't stay in the Huang family village any longer. Instead, he left the small village that he had lived in for over a month. The Huang village was located in an extremely remote location. It was surrounded by mountains, so very few people could set foot in this place. According to Rothko and the old village chief's instructions, Jianshan constantly traversed the mountains in a certain direction and made his way out. During this period of time, Jianshan also discovered many small villages like the Huang family village. The Huang family village wasn't the only village in this mountain range. Jianshan memorized the route of the Huang family village as he traveled. He wasn't going to leave the Huang family village forever. After taking care of everything, he was going to return here to meet up with Ming Dong again. However, it wasn't that easy to find a completely nondescript village in this mountain range. Hence, in order to ensure that he wouldn't get lost the next time he came here, Jianshan memorized the route of the Huang family village in his mind. There were some wild beasts roaming the mountain range from time to time, but there were very few devilish beasts. Jianshan traveled through the mountain range at a normal speed for an entire day, but he only encountered 2 first-grade devilish beasts. This mountain range was indeed very large. Jianshan didn't know where he had fallen into the cliff and been swept away by the river. He didn't know if he was still in the Blue Wind Kingdom. Jianshan traveled through the mountain range until nightfall, and only then did he finally emerge from the mountain range and arrive at a flat plain. The bright moon hung high in the sky, casting down a vast expanse of pristine moonlight that dispelled much of the darkness. Jianshan traveled through the night, but thankfully he soon encountered a group of mercenaries who were camping out in the wilderness. There were over 20 tents set up, and there were several piles of firewood that were slowly burning, giving off bright light. Jianshan slowly made his way toward the group of mercenaries that were camping out around 100 meters away. He didn't try to conceal his presence, so the sound of his footsteps stirring up some of the weeds on the ground quickly attracted the attention of some of the mercenaries who were on high alert. "Who goes there?" Suddenly, a loud shout was heard, and the voice was very loud, waking up some of the mercenaries who were sleeping soundly. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the originally quiet camp. A large number of people rushed out of their tents, and their faces were vigilant as they scanned the surroundings. When the bright firelight illuminated Jianshan's body, the mercenaries immediately discovered Jianshan's figure, but when they discovered that Jianshan was alone, their tense nerves obviously relaxed a little. "Who goes there? Report your name." Among the mercenaries, one of them immediately shouted at Jianshan. Jianshan stopped when he was only 20 meters away from the group of mercenaries and said, "I was just passing by this place, and I lost my way. I don't know if I can borrow your map." Hearing this, the group of mercenaries looked at each other with a trace of surprise on their faces. Then one of them, who seemed to be the leader, said, "Where did you come from? Where are you going?" Jianshan hesitated for a moment and said, "Before I answer this question, can you first tell me if this is the Blue Wind Kingdom?" Hearing Jianshan's words, the group of mercenaries looked at Jianshan with eyes full of surprise. "That's right, this is the Blue Wind Kingdom." This time, the one who answered Jianshan was a relatively thin mercenary in the group. Hearing that they were still in the Blue Wind Kingdom, Jianshan's face suddenly showed a trace of happiness and said, "That's great. This time I want to go to a third-class city, Wake City. I don't know if you can tell me the direction. I will definitely thank you." "What did you say? You actually want to go to Wake City?" When Jianshan's voice fell, a mercenary said in a surprised tone. The rest of the people also looked at Jianshan with strange expressions. Seeing the expressions on everyone's faces, Jianshan's face showed a trace of confusion and asked, "Is there a problem?" "No problem, huh? We are also going to Wake City. I didn't expect that we would be going the same way." A person said with a laugh. "Since we're all going to Wake City, why don't we go the same way? It's quite a distance from here to Wake City, And the road isn't safe. One more person means one more person. A tall and sturdy man said with a smile. His tone was very amiable. Leader is right, this place is very far from Wake City. If you want to go there by yourself, it won't be safe. Why don't we go together? Another tall and sturdy man around 40 years old said, Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.